You or someone you know loves lipstick or lip balm and needs to have it on the go, and they don't want to fumble in their purse anymore looking for it, then you are in luck, because in this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to make this lip balm or lipstick holder that just sits in here. You can hook it onto your purse. This is going to help keep this at your fingertips. This is one of those cute little projects that have so many uses. This is great stocking stuffer, coworker gift, things to sew and sell, things to donate. Adding the key fob hardware, it comes with the keychain. You can also put a lobster clasp on there if you want to be able to clip it onto a bag so that it is always at your fingertips and you're not rummaging through looking for what you need. You need very few things to make these cute little lip balm holders with the key fob keychain. First, you're going to need a piece of fabric. And if you're using directional fabric, the direction needs to be going this way and not side to side. Then you need a piece of lightweight interfacing that is fusible on one side. We're going to need a pressing cloth for pressing the interfacing onto the fabric. I'll show you why and how in a second. Then a 1-inch key fob hardware, and I highly recommend the pliers that come with these silicone tips. This is the perfect size for squeezing this shut. You won't end up with any dents. Sometimes people try and use pliers just to save a few dollars. It often ruins a few key fob hardware pieces. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is get this interfacing fused to the wrong side of the fabric. Now, with any kind of fusible material, which is one-sided, it's going to be scratchy on one side, and that's how you can tell that's where the fusible material is. The other side is going to be smoother. So you're going to put the scratchy side to the back of your fabric and center it. Make sure it's not hanging over, like you don't want it like this. And then we're going to flip that over. The reason that you're going to iron from the fabric side and not the fusible side is you want the heat as close to the fabric and the fusible material as possible. While this is pretty thin, I'm sure it would work if we fused from this other side. It's just a good habit to get into because some things are thicker and you really do need the heat coming straight down through the fabric to the fusible material. Now comes the pressing cloth. You can buy them as pressing cloths. You can use an old piece of muslin, a piece of cotton. In a recent live video, somebody said their mom used to use a piece of an old pillowcase or sheets. So it's pretty much just a cloth to protect your iron. This is going to put a layer between your fabric and fusible material and your iron, partially in case this gets moved, right? So if it slides for some reason and the fusing part is sticking out, you want it to fuse by mistake onto pressing cloth and not onto your iron. Now, because we do worry about things shifting a little bit, we're going to be pressing and not ironing. And if you haven't heard this before, yes, there is a distinction. When you're ironing, it's like when you iron clothes. You keep the iron down and you move the iron around. Pressing is to lift it, push down, and press, and then lift it, move it, push down, and press. So there's no gliding of the iron. That is what can cause a shifting when you're doing this or pressing seams for quilt blocks or other things. For this and most fusible products, you're going to use no steam and often the wool or silk setting. Make sure you just check the directions on whichever product you're using. I like to start in the center. This says to use medium pressure, so I'm pressing down, but not like my life depends on it, and keep it pressed for about 10 seconds. Then I'm going to lift, and I'm going to move forward, and I'm just going to keep doing that until I have covered all of the fabric and have the entire length fused together. What this interfacing is doing is it adding a little bit of stiffness to the fabric so that it's going to hold the shape of the lipstick holder well. You always want to let that cool, and then I always just check the edges, because if I haven't fused well somewhere, it's going to be at these ends or the edges, especially since I always start in the middle. Well, there's an air bubble right there. I'm going to give it another shot right there. You want to make sure you take your time and get any fusible material pressed well so that the project will turn out well. It kind of is a cascading problem if you don't have it adhered on there well enough. Now that we have these fused together, we are going to fold this right sides together, matching these short ends, and just finger press that fold. This fold is going to be up here where the key fob hardware is, so now we need to create these angles so that it gives it a nice shape. There are two ways to do that. If you get the pattern, this is available in the Etsy shop, and it gives you all the details and lots of pictures of what to do. it includes a template. So to use the template, you're just going to cut this out of the paper. The first time I use it, I'm obviously not precise about how I cut it because that will happen when we're using the rotary cutter. I do cut this top edge well because we need to put that right on that fold. So I'm going to show you using this on the one side, and then I'm going to show you how to measure and cut if you don't want to get the pattern. So I'm placing this line on the fold. You're just going to make sure these lines are lined up with the edges. And then you're simply going to take your ruler, place it right on that line, and cut. Makes it super quick and fast. But there is another way that you can do it. And I'm going to turn this over just so I can do this nice and easy right-handed. You're going to center your fabric. So basically, this line is the center. We're about 1/8 of an inch to either side of the 1-inch lines on the side. So if you want to mark this with your pen, you're putting a mark 3/8 of an inch along this fold. So basically at that 1/4 inch mark, since the edge is at 1/8 of an inch, and then 3/4 of an inch down. Then you just take your ruler, match those points, and cut. Or you can just use the ruler and set it up at the 3/8 and the 3/4 inch down and cut that angle. So whichever way you want to do it, you're going to have the same result. Then I like to just take 2 straight pins and put them right in the center, because then I can sew all the way around this without having to deal with the pins, and it holds the fabric in place just fine. Now we're going to head to the sewing machine. We're going to sew up here around the top and down here, leaving this end open for turning, and we're going to do that with a 1/4 inch seam. To avoid knots like this, called bird's nests, where the top thread is pulled down when you first start sewing and creates a knot with the bobbin thread, I want a beautiful start like this. I'm going to be using a leader fabric. And a leader fabric is basically just a piece of scrap fabric that you're going to start on. So if there are any knots, they're going to be on here and not on your project. So I just take a few stitches on that. And I use this whenever I'm starting off of the edge of the fabric of a project. If you're starting in the center or somewhere where on your finished project, you're going to see both where the bobbin and the top thread are, then I would pull up the bobbin thread. But for anything like this, where we're starting off the edge, the leader fabric is faster and does the job. So now we sew onto the project, backstitch a few stitches, and we're just going to go around with a 1/4 inch seam. Now that I have that sewn, I'm going to take the pins out, and I'm going to flip my mat over. This is a Riley Blake mat, and I love it because it is dark on one side and light on the other. I should have had this dark side up when we cut, but you can see this white way better. I apologize for not using this side of the mat when we were cutting these angles, but this way it's going to be easier for you to see how I'm going to notch these corners. So it's basically like clipping the corners. Make sure you're not cutting the stitching, but I just like to do 2 little cuts. So it's more like notching. If you sew clothing, this is going to look really familiar, like cutting out all those little triangles. And I like to do it at both of the points that are going to be creating this shape, because you need to take some of this fabric out so that when you turn it right side out, it's going to press well and you're not going to be struggling against the fabric at these points. So we have those 4 notched out. Now we just need to turn this right side out. You can just do it by hand, but because it is so stiff with the interfacing and the fabric, it is kind of difficult and takes a while. So I like to get my tube turner. This is a 1/2 inch tube turner. It is a hard plastic tube and a dowel rod with a dull point on the end. Now, if you are turning tubes that are just fabric, a lot of people have been using boba straws recently, which works great. I don't think it will work with this because it's a little bit too stiff. I think your straw will bend. So you just push this into the tube, and then you push the tip in, and you want to be gentle with this part. You want to just get it so that the fabric is going into that tube. I can feel that it has gone in. And then often you'll just keep pushing until it comes out this end. But I'm worried that that will cause too much pressure on the fabric and that we might bust through it. So I get it so that it's in there, and then I just push that back and then take the tube off. And now I already have this dowel rod in here so that I can use it to gently push out the points. You always want to just go slowly and gently, kind of pushing this tip along the seam line until you get to these corners that we notched. And you'll know it's done when that top is 1 inch wide. See, it is 1 inch from here to here. Okay, so when we're happy with that, get our ironing board back. And now we just need to press it flat, making sure that this doesn't pinch. We don't want the seam pinched inside. So I like to kind of roll it with my fingers. We're making sure that that stitching and the seam is on the outer edge so that the entire length of this is going to be 1 inch wide. You can also take the dowel rod and run it along that seam again to kind of help with that process. But you want it so that you're not seeing the fabric from the back on the front or the front from the back. And there's really no front or back to this yet. Okay, so I do one side and then I come back and I do the other side. You can also use your clapper if you have one. After you press that, you just press down on the fabric. It absorbs some of the heat and it really flattens the edges. So that is looking good. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to zigzag across the edge, or if you have a serger, you just serge along that edge to prevent fraying. I've changed my presser foot so that I can do a zigzag stitch, and we're going to do it to go right along the edge, or you can use an overlock stitch depending on what stitches your machine has, or if you have a serger, just serge right along there. Basically, we want to prevent this from happening as you're using your lipstick holders. Because I don't do a lot of zigzag, I always test the length and width of my zigzag before I put it on my project. I'm going to do the length of 1.1 and a width of 4.1. Pretty sure that is what I had decided in the pattern. So let's just test that and see what it looks like. It's a little bit skinny for really going over that edge. And I went back and looked at the pattern again, and I actually used 4.4 wide. So let's try that. This is why I test. Okay, that is a lot better. So we don't need the zigzag to be super close together. We're not doing a defined applique. This is really functional just to make sure this all stays in place and doesn't fray. So that is going to be a much better width. So let's get that done. So now we have that nice and finished, and it is time to press and fold this up, and then we will just stitch around, put the key fob hardware on, and it will be done. So let me know in the comments who you would make a lip balm or lipstick holder for, and please don't forget to put yourself on the list. As I was editing the video, I realized that I forgot to show you what side to fold if you're using directional fabric. So this side, the print is upside down. Then on this side, the print is right side up. The leaves are going up this way, like that. So if you chose a directional fabric, just remember, one side, it's going to be right side up. The other side, it will be upside down. Before you start folding and pressing, have the right side up, right side up. I hope you're not feeling double-crossed, as my nephew likes to say, because I'm bringing out another tool. First, I showed you the clapper that I hadn't shown you in the beginning, and the tube turner, and now I'm going to show you the hot ruler. You don't have to have these things, but they just make this project a little bit easier. So a hot ruler, if you haven't seen it before, it's flexible, it's kind of fuzzy. The texture helps hold the fabric in place, and you can iron right on it. So the first thing we are doing is we are going to be folding this up from the zigzag edge 1 inch and pressing. So what I do is I just put the fabric underneath the hot ruler, and I'm going to make sure that this line, and it's any random line, is lined up along the edge. We don't want it to be crooked, or we're going to have a crooked fold. So my zigzag is at the 1 inch, and then I can just press right on there. Now this does have a little bit of thickness to it, so I often come back and do my pressing one more time after using a hot ruler. Now you obviously don't need to do that. You could also just take your ruler, sit it next to it, fold it up 1 inch, and press. So you can use the same technique to do the next fold, which is going to be 2.5 inches up, but I'm going to show you this time using the ruler. So you're going to be using what you have, and you've seen both ways. So I'm going to put this fold at the 2.5 inch mark, and then I'm just going to put my thumb right at the top of the ruler, fold this up, lining up the edges, and that should be 2.5 inches. Double check it. Yep, it is. And then press. And then I'm just going to take 2 clips to hold that together. Now you'll notice here there's a little thread sticking out. So I'm going to make sure I get that trimmed. I didn't cut that properly. And then as we sew, We also want to make sure little edges like that don't stick out. So I'll show you at the sewing machine, but I basically just push that under as I'm sewing if it's sticking out, because we want a nice clean edge to this. So now we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to sew up, around, and down about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Don't sew across this bottom. You want that open because you want all the space for the lipstick or the lip balm. And if you pinched it down there, it's going to push everything back up and it's not going to look quite as good. So we're just sewing here, 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 here. I've changed back to my 1/4 inch walking foot because this is pretty thick. It's a lot of layers that we're going to be sewing through. So using a walking foot is going to just help everything move evenly instead of just relying on those feed dogs. So if you are going to be making a bunch of these as gifts or to sew and sell, you would want to batch them. Get everything to the point where you need to zigzag, then change your needle, do all your zigzags or use your serger, do all your serging, then come back and do top stitching on all of them. Now I'm going to show you how to use a hump jumper and also how to pull up your bobbin thread. Hump jumper basically means a way to use extra fabric to keep your presser foot even so that it's not starting at an angle. And it also gives your feed dogs a little something more to work with as you start off the edge of something thick. So what I have done is I've just taken fabric, folded it, zigzagged. I use these to hang up quilts. So I'll like pin them on the back of a quilt and then I can put a dowel rod through there. But I also use them as these hump jumpers and I just pile them up so that they're about the same height as my project. Then I'll push that back. We're not going to sew in those at all. They're just used for support. Then I'm going to put my project right there. And then I'm going to put my foot down so that when my needle goes down, it's going to be in the project. So this is just going to push off the back. I'm going to hold my top thread. Don't want it under the presser foot. Just hold it. Put your needle down. Lift your needle and give a little tug. And you can see that bobbin thread come up. Now, the reason we're doing this is so we don't get those knots that we talked about with the leader fabric. And even though we're kind of starting at the edge, I don't like how it looks to use a leader fabric on this finished project. It looks better to pull up the bobbin thread. So now I have both the bobbin and the top thread in my fingers. I use the tweezers so that I don't poke myself on there. And it's also handy to then push these threads down so that I can easily have them under the presser foot and pull them back. Now I'm going to hold that tight, but not so tight that I'm pulling the thread. Now I'm going to take like 2 to 3 stitches forward and then back, all the while holding my thread. Once you get that knotted, you can let go of your thread and you can get moving. Now you'll see that just popped off the back. Now we're getting to that point where I said you need to be careful. You need to watch out that the zigzag part isn't sticking out. So I take my tweezers again, I just kind of push that under a teeny bit so that it's still going to be caught, but we don't want it sticking out there. Then I'm going to use the side of my scissors to hold down that fabric to make sure we get over that lump nicely. Now, because most of the strain will be right here at that fold when you're putting your lipstick or your lip balm in and out, I like to double back on there for extra strength and then just keep going. And just go slowly because again, this is pretty thick. I'm going to be pushing that under. I'm going to help the presser foot get up here by kind of pressing down on that fabric until make sure it gets under the presser foot. Sometimes if you don't do that, it'll get flapped up. Your presser foot will push it instead of going on top of it. Ooh, that's trying to stick out again. So I'm going to pause, get that pushed under, and keep going. And now all we need to do is add the key fob hardware. Our final step is to get this key fob hardware, which is open, has a little clip there, onto the fabric so that it works like this. So basically, the hardware is a piece of metal that you're going to squeeze shut with the pliers and attach to this fabric. It's got a little hook that is going to help dig into the fabric to keep it in place. Sometimes people will put a little bit of glue like E6000 in there. I don't think there's going to be a lot of pressure on your lipstick holder pulling, so I don't do that, but that is something that some people do. Now, the way I install these, I like to put it into my pliers first. So I'm just placing it there. I'm not squeezing, I'm just holding it so that it holds in place and making sure the front edge of the metal is lined up with the front edge of the silicone and that this keychain isn't in my way. Also, some people will take these off. I don't feel it's necessary, so it's just another thing to do on and off, so I just leave them there. Then you're going to take the holder and you're going to line this 1 inch up so that it is centered in that metal. Just kind of check both sides, make sure it's lined up. You don't want it partly in. Press that fabric against the fold of the key fob hardware. And when you're happy with where it's going to be, you're just going to squeeze. I squeeze a little bit to put it in place, and then I always do 2 hands to make sure it is nice and tight. And look at that. That's it. It is done. And this size is going to work perfect for an average size lipstick because we don't want it to be bouncing over top of that. And it also works great for lip balm, chapstick, Burt's Bees, whatever brand you prefer. This is always a little bit shorter than a lipstick, so I make sure the size works for both. But look how cute that is. So you could put your keys on there, so you have a keychain and your lipstick is always at the ready. Or like I did with this one, you can add a lobster clasp, and you can do a small lobster clasp, a large one like this, whatever you want. This way I can hook that right onto a bag. So now that lipstick holder is ready to go. It would be really cute to pair with a coordinating fabric wristlet keychain and an eyeglass case. I think this is just like the perfect gift for a coworker, stocking stuffer, Mother's Day, teacher appreciation, all the times where you just want to make something, maybe using your fabric scraps, that says, thank you so much, I appreciate you, it's coordinated, people appreciate that, and it's not going to take a ton of time. Of course, don't forget to make something like this for yourself.